check groups up on the board up there. Wave. We'll, maybe, if, Barb, if you could introduce your colleagues.
All right, hi everyone. I've brought several members of the site civil department this evening. We've got Michael Hale, John Ryan, and Dan Bussman.
Thank you. You guys don't have to sign the sheet. Okay, Lou, you ready to jump in here? Just, you have in front of you preliminary estimates that the Palumbo Group has put together for us. Keep in mind that these are very preliminary, all right? They're probably on the high side, using costs now as opposed to what they will be in a year or two from now, because the expectation is they'll probably go down. But to really get more accurate numbers, we're going to have to get rid of some of the variables out of this list. And at that point, let me hand it over to Lou.
Thanks, guys. So, yeah, I think first and foremost, this should be a fluid document. It's a work in progress. Right now, we're, at 30,000 feet, and we want to get closer and closer to a place where everyone feels comfortable with putting together a scope of work that goes out to the community. What I did, I went through the narratives. I did go through the buildings with Walter and Harvey to get a better sense of the scope. So as we walk through these lines, if you guys have specific questions, we can definitely dope down into it. For me, I think what really jumps out when you look at the scopes of work is that the site work side of things is really, you guys are really focusing on, first and foremost, circulation, parking throughout all the facilities. So there's a significant amount of money for that. And then the sports fields at the middle school and the high school also are pretty significant. After that point, when you look at the scopes of work, it's the bathroom renovations across the schools that really stand out. And then there's also HVAC and boiler upgrades. There's boiler replacements that are happening at multiple facilities. And then the other big numbers are your locker room renovations at the middle school. And then we also have locker room renovations at the high school as well. And then as you'll see, there's smaller numbers, but for things that are a lot more specific. And what we need to do as a team is sort of continue to look at this, continue to prioritize more. And as we go through, if there's specific questions on the backup on the cost, or even why we would be doing it, then I guess the team got Tetra Tech, Walter can talk to, and Harvey can talk to all of the reasons why these things are on the list. My job was to sort of, let's get to a starting point, big picture, and then now we can really start to take it to another place and, and put together a project for the community to vote on. So I don't know if the intent was to go line for line really, or really keep it more big picture and
Yeah,
look at
let's
the
just
big-
keep at the moment with the
Yep.
big picture instead of getting caught up in each individual line. I think one of the discussions that I think really needs to be done before we can, I think we've all decided or had the discussion that roofs and bathrooms are a given, that we don't have a choice about roofs and bathrooms. One of the biggest choices we have is the athletic complex. And that would be one of the largest variable in this paper here, where that would hit the project. You have in front of you a four possible options for an athletic facility. One of the things I think we need to look at seriously, because I think it's up to us at this point to make recommendations, is do we keep and put in a new stadium at the middle school, or do we put a new stadium in the high school? In front of you is a summary of four different options. Two different options for the middle school and two different options for the high school. I guess I open it for discussion. Yeah, how about, yes. You guys came up with, Tetra Tech came up with some concepts for us. Could you explain what you've done?
Yes, and this is why I have brought such a large posse of site civil people today. And Michael and his gang really put together these concepts after a little discussion with Harvey. So Michael, if you're able to share your screen, maybe you can take us through them one by one, please.
Sure. Let me see if I can present. Okay. We should shortly be able to see
Yes.
the first high school concept that we put together. And I would say this is just the first of four. We essentially wanted to look at this as a preliminary option to what was initially some discussions about the middle school. So we'll start here. And in this, I would just indicate first that in terms of my team, I brought John Ryan, as he's the one who was able to quickly put these together. So nice job, John. So he can answer any questions, related to just the preparations of this. And then Dan Busman is one of our more technical minds in the firm with respect to the particulars of turf fields, and has a pretty extensive vernacular on that. So anyway, we put this together first as a consideration for where we might be able to put an alternative multi-purpose track and field complex. And it does coincidentally fit quite well in the location where the current softball diamonds are. And while we weren't necessarily asked to solve the problem with the softball, we've decided that, well, we could illustrate nonetheless the potential location for those fields. And that would be, of course, as you see, where the existing football and track are now. One thing I note and could add is that if there's a desire to have a little bit more in terms of either scrimmage or practice or gym activities, the outfields of these softball fields could be combined potentially without an extensive or exhaustive additional budget. And then you have a more extensive turf platform that could be used for other purposes. So that's option one of the high school. So I'll switch over to option two, or unless there's some questions about this you want to ask.
And we'll just say that if we did this option, be thinking too about what, if anything, you'd want to do at the middle school. Because if you do this option one, maybe you do nothing at the middle school, or maybe you just make improvements to the field over there, or are you thinking turf at that facility as well? So
right, yes, thank you, Barb. Yep, that's a good footnote to this. So yes, this could potentially be the project or in concert with another at the middle school. So the other high school project, which is more directly related to that potential, is what could be called a scrimmage practice, gym field, or whatever you want to call it, for soccer and this could be striped for football practice if you'd like. It was fitting to have it sit in the existing soccer field location. And if you're going to do that, it was just a suggestion that you could just combine that with the baseball diamond, again, without a major increase in budget, to have them combined over there. And this, as Barbara mentioned, could be potentially combined with something at the middle school if you decide to put a complex over there as your main multi-purpose field, for example, and we'll get to that
Right.
next.
So
And
the
then-
idea was if you do something at the middle school, the idea of are they practicing on natural grass but playing
Right.
on a synthetic field? So this would give them a place to scrimmage on a synthetic field as well. So this would be in concert with potentially having the stadium at the middle school and also doing this.
Exactly. Now, another option that wasn't really discussed much, but we thought we'd throw it out there just for discussion purposes, is if this was kind of a preferred approach, and there was some limitation, if any, to the middle school options, there was still the potential for this football field inside the track to also be made turf. I mean, that's another thing we didn't illustrate, but it's something to chew on for that purpose. If for whatever reason we're kind of limited to this site and the middle school isn't necessarily part of that option. So that's another possibility. So moving on to the middle school. This was an option we looked at where the main multi-purpose field will be placed behind the school. In terms of the bleachers, they could be made home field or home bleacher, visitor bleachers either side. We could switch it if we want. We could have the straight on either side. But this is by no means cast, but illustrative of how we might put this together behind the school. The baseball diamond would have ample room to slide south. And if you note, this diagram has been rotated a little bit to be fit better on the screen. So just make a note of that. So we're not directly north-south on this one, but
Right. And obviously what is the track and field now would become other field. You wouldn't have two.
exactly. Yeah. So that baseball diamond could shift to the south and be placed readily down toward that small parking lot to serve that purpose. Again, these fields that we're showing are, I believe, a 125-foot diameter bend, different than the equilateral track you now have. It does provide the capacity that you would want for the larger inset field for a combination of soccer, football, lacrosse, or whatever sports you see fit to add there. And you do seem to have the room for it. So that was the first one. And then the second option that was thought about was, what if we shift it south, retaining the existing baseball, football practice field scenario, and push it down across the what we call the cut-through road. It was thought about as a means to not only provide more space, but to eliminate that cut-through possibility. That does open up room on either side for additional parking or other ancillary activities either side of the track, whether it be concession or what have you. So this is another possibility you can consider. There
And
may
this
be a little-
option offered more north-south orientation of the field as well, which is preferable.
Exactly. Yep. So with that, we can take any questions. There may be a little bit more grading consideration for this particular option. We'd have to look at that closer, but there could be a little bit additional grading here, depending on the elevation changes from north to south. So that's in a nutshell what we looked at. So we could turn it out for questions now if you'd like to come back with that, and I can switch through these anytime. I'll ask Dan Busman, you think we want to look at some of the options for the field layouts too while we're here?
Just a few big picture points. Back to Lou's estimates, One of the reasons why Larry was, bringing our focus to the athletic complex is if you look at the last page number, even with everything not all in, we're at 50 million. So again, let's remember what we're working with. So we have to start narrowing. That's where the engagement with what are our top priorities at this time, which is why it's really important to scrutinize something where there's a lot of variability. So we have an option of turf fields at both locations. Is that something that we believe this community would be able to stomach and support? And then there's lots of variability with regards to what happens if we put the athletic complex at the high school versus middle school. So I just want to, again, bring us back to, we know what the target number is with regards to the funds that we have to operate within. We're starting to get some projected estimates. You can look at the difference between site work versus, like we were saying, roofs and bathrooms. It doesn't take long to start doing some quick back-of-the-napkin math to see what we're actually talking about here. So keep that frame of reference as we start to have these discussions about we want to provide our community as much as possible out of this. Again, we want every family to see their kids benefiting from this capital project as much as possible. So the more money we can get out of kind of broad repairs would be great. I just wanted to make sure we're not lose estimates as we shift into the athletic complex discussion, because there's a lot of variability here as we think of next steps with athletics.
Yeah, so if you'd like, I could just go real quickly through a few of the options for the tracks and field sizes and dimensions. I can let Dan Bussman narrate this if you'd like, and I can put them on one at a time. It won't take long, but it would give you some sense of what we have as options for the different dimensions of fields. Not that we're going to get diving into that detail very deeply, but it'll give you a preview of what we'll be thinking about as we move forward with whatever field design there might be. So we'll start with this first one. So Dan, you want to narrate this?
Yeah, I was looking for the mute button. All right, the first thing I have to preface is, if you move forward with the synthetic turf field, you have the opportunity to have the coolest logo for the center field that I've ever seen. The dragon logo that you have on your school site is excellent. It's very cool. So, Michael, actually start with C if you can. The configuration you're seeing right there is what's called an equilateral running track. It's what you currently have. And it was really what the traditional, it works on narrow sites, but it was also the traditional track layout that you would see, because the straights are the same length as the arcs. A lot of schools are moving away from that in order to get and facilitate a wider soccer field, which is closer to, I'll call it the preferred width that schools, that the school districts tend to prefer now. So maybe you can switch now back to A. And you can see what this does is it's got a little bit longer arc in terms of the corners, and the straights are a little bit shorter. But what that does is that allows you to put in a wider soccer field, even with run out. It serves multi-purpose field use much better, which allows you to put, your potentially five sports. I didn't look at your athletics page close enough to know if you have field hockey, but you can actually stripe your field for basically men's and women's lacrosse, soccer, football, field hockey. You can add like a limited baseball program in terms of practice in the spring, a limited infield, like where you could stripe for infields for practice, that type of thing, to just maximize your use. This configuration is pretty nice generally, because you can do all the field options as well as have your track program, but you can have some of your field events for track in the D zones. You can have some high jump, basically. And I believe you can just fit in this configuration, you can just fit high jump, but then switch maybe to the double bend. We're also seeing a lot of schools move to what they call a European style double bend track, where it uses 3 radiuses on each end. and it gives you the maximum width that you can achieve for a full-size soccer field, which is a 225 by 360. One really nice thing about that, in addition to being able to have such a large event, is it just gives a lot of practice space for PE and everything else. The only downside to this is the D zones, because they're smaller, and a D zone is basically the paved area in the arc. Maybe Michael can point to it.
Yes, sir. I don't know if you can see that.
I just use the term D zone like everyone understands what I'm talking about. It's basically the
Right.
paved
Right.
end that's past the field.
Right.
It's a little more limited, so you really can't do a true D zone, so you end up having to site that outside of the track running oval, if that makes sense. So it's just some of the options and the things we look at based on what the site offers and how we can most affordably maximize that area for use for the school.
So do all of these fit potentially in all of the schemes, or are there certain schemes that it would have to be one or the other?
They do. Generally, unless we have a very narrow site, we would not recommend equilateral track anymore. It makes it difficult even with a 180-foot soccer field in terms of width. Even with that, it's tight with run out. So generally, we are moving away from equilateral tracks. But what's nice about this field is this configuration, when you see the double bend as an example, is because it squashes the field down so much, it actually opens up some areas on the ends that you may not have had available to use. So,
Right.
okay.
That makes this
Look
a
at that.
secondary decision if we could ultimately get all three to work in the various scenarios.
Correct.
Exactly. There may be some little considerations depending on where it is, but generally it looks like there's plenty of room. The only thing I would supplement there, and then we can turn it over, would be that, and maybe you noticed it or not, but the straights on these versions that we just showed you each have 8 lanes as opposed to 6. That's become, again, a relatively popular option, especially when there's either not enough room to do an 8 on the oval, or it just doesn't make sense to because of a bunch of other reasons we won't need to get into.
Right. It really comes, just to touch on that. If the school, and again, I want to preface this, if the school wanted to entertain hosting an invitational, sometimes having that eighth lane is a nice asset to have. Keep in mind, there's no assurance that a sectional event could be held there, because there's a lot of other factors that come into that. But you could certainly host an invitational, that type of thing. So
Right.
sometimes there's advantages to having an 8 lane. Yes.
Yep.
Even if the school district's population is limited.
Okay, thanks. Now I
Right.
think we can turn it over for them to start debating. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Great. Okay, we just got an awful lot of information there. Any questions for them before? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, was there a reason why you didn't overlay the field on the existing field at the middle school? Why wasn't that done?
What our ask of Tetra Tech as fresh eyes looking in, what are all the possibilities to, one, look at deficiencies that we have existing, so we all know that there's problems with our existing layout with regards to where can we expand and things of that nature. It's not to say that they can't go back. We know the current state, so that's easy for us to visualize. These are, how do we think differently? It's really hard because a lot of us have lived what is our existing state right now. So again, they can always go back and do that. What we wanted to do was look at all of the existing footprint that we have at the high school and the middle school, and how could we accomplish some things that the community are looking for with our existing green space.
I do have a question about middle school option 2. And Walter, maybe you could answer this, because I'm not quite sure how well that access road is used. But by configuring that where it's laying on top of the access road, obviously eliminating that, does that eliminate emergency access to the school, to the fields if needed?
Well, no. Well, the quick answer is no to both cases. There's still access in front and around the back by other means, and access to the field would still be afforded by either side. So I wouldn't consider that a major problem in terms of emergency vehicle access.
Walter?
Yep,
Walter, if you could answer that, because you're the one who lives it every day.
So we've nicknamed that small little dusty road the Cornwall Thruway. It has become a grassroots thoroughfare, not only for the buses that leave the middle school, and even not at the end of the day, but during the day. And Harvey could speak towards that. But because of the congestion that happens in the front of the building over on Main Street, that road has become very important to staff, parents, community members. So there is a lot of traffic that does go through that road. I'm not saying that it is wanted or best used as a vehicle thoroughfare, but we would have to absolutely take in consideration some sort of pathway or additional route or some other alternative.
Can we assume the price tag for the athletic fields at the high school and middle school are the same? Because I noticed that they're itemized very differently in the layout. In the middle school, it's kind of all one number, demo existing field, reconfigure field size, install synthetic turf, 6-lane running track, 6.5 million. Whereas with the high school, it's much more itemized. I suppose I could do the math myself, but I just want to be sure that these packages are of equal value. So this is really like an apples to apples kind of decision. Is that right?
If you're looking for me to say that this is the first time I'm seeing these, so really, as far as the field at the middle school, it's in play where it was, not with the reconfiguration. And the same thing at the high school. And at the high school, I did not have, when you look at option one with the two baseball fields that are opposite each other, I didn't have that kind of number. So that's, again, I think what's important here is to understand if one of these options sort of rises to the top, then I can come back and do some more homework. But over at the middle school, I was replacing what was there in kind with a synthetic field, 6-lane track, and basically the same kind of orientation. This track and field is very similar because it's very slim to Spack and Kills. So I took a lot of those numbers from that project, very similar to this when you look at the size. So I looked at that to really price this project. Now, if you start widening it, the field turf area does become a lot larger. The dimensions that Dan was talking about brings you now closer to a 90,000 square foot area, as opposed to, over a Spack, we're at 70,000 square feet of field turf area. It's a 6-lane track, and it's still tight. When you look at that, and it's similar to what you have here, it's a tight track. So that's the kind of feedback we need tonight, is to see if one of these options sort of comes to the top for you guys, then I can go back and do some more work to work on the numbers.
I totally appreciate that. I would say, at least my own perspective would be, before we make a decision, it would be very hard for us to say the middle school option is better than any of the high school options without knowing the comparative cost, just because we are working with a finite amount of money and we want to get the most out of it. So there are obviously maybe some preferences within each bucket, but maybe if we come up with what's our favorite on the middle school, what's our favorite on the high school, but still get pricing on both of those, because that seems like the big first decision. Where are we going to put it? We can't make that decision unless we know what the comparative price is.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. I'm looking at this as it has to be an a la carte. They can do it. I know Tetra Tech and Palumbo Group can do it. It has to be an a la carte. If we put it at the middle school, here are our menu of options. Turf field costs 2.1, bleachers cost X, concession stand costs X, locker rooms cost X. It will be a la carte. You'll have that same a la carte at at the high school. I think the only difference, and I don't think it's going to be large enough for this group to have a pivotal decision, is going to be demo and replacement, which is still going to occur at the high school or the middle school. So I'm with Brendan. I do want to see a little bit more. I saw the difference in the like all-in 6.5 versus what would be at the high school, but then I started looking at the itemized bleachers, concession stand, et cetera. So I don't know how we move closer to that point so that the group can make a decision, but I really do see it being a 5 to 6 item a la carte. The track's missing from the high school equation, so I mean that cost is not even in there. So there's still some work to do. I think one of the pieces that we could probably use some good discussion tonight are like pros and cons of the different locations, just because it's going to be hard to make it. We're not going to make a decision tonight, obviously, but what are some of the pros and cons we're seeing about the different locations, the different options that are kind of rising top of mind?
I was just going to suggest that also, that conceptually we need to think about what location. And I think as long as we have our athletic director and our middle school principal here, I'd like to hear their input as to the options.
Can you hear me if I take this off? Looking at what's been whittled down, if you're looking at my opinion as an outside person who has no true vested long-term interest, but just making a lot of observations with what's around, having many years of experience and having gone through this process before, to me, it boils down to if there's going to be one field built, and based on reading all the scopes of your buildings, you're not really going to build 2 turf fields. That's a reality. You're not going to get 2 turf fields out of $22 million. Water is an issue inside and out. It's an issue in your buildings coming through. It's an issue on some of your fields. In my opinion, you get way more bang for your buck if you put a multi-purpose turf field at your high school. You've got 2 days worth of grounds crews and people that you lose now because they're transporting and moving and preparing a field. Friday is a full day of preparation, and Monday is a full day of taking out equipment, including a gator that you transport on a flatbed. You're transporting teams over there. We're transporting the trainer over there. Our time frame is not the same as the middle school time frame. There is no locker room facility over there. That's deplorable. That's a whole different topic. No disrespect. So there's really no place for players to be. Parking is a safety issue to me. Your big drainage where you currently have is a safety concern. Game management is a huge safety concern. Where the parking lot is, where the cars are so close to the field. I have twice had to go and tell people to shut their lights off because it's shining onto your field. There's no perimeter lighting, so they have to go and bring lights in for safety. The track is in great shape there. I wouldn't rip it up. It's only a couple of years old. And right now you're using it for football, which is about 8 games for a fall season. You put it at the high school, without even football going there, you're going to have over 64 games and countless of practices between your soccers at JV and varsity boys and girls and your lacrosse JV and varsity girls. If half your games are home, that's minimally 64 games with just those teams. You add football there, there's another 8, 9, maybe some playoffs. To me, that makes more sense. You're eliminating the costs to transport everybody over there, because if it does go to the middle school, now you're going to transport every team. And that's only going to exasperate what's there, because if there's only one turf field, you can't say only certain teams play on it. They all have to play on it. So from an outside perspective, one turf field, one nice, beautiful stadium as a multi-purpose should be at your high school. The facilities are there. You have, and where this plan puts it is way more manageable, way more safe. Parking, because middle school, if you shift it, I don't know where you're parking, because parking right now is bad. So that's my quick.
Thank you. No, that's important.
So I've never been a fan of the fact that the high school uses the middle school facilities. I'm not going to be shy about that. In looking at these two proposals, that the Cornwall Thruway, or we call it the service road, whatever it is a valuable, it's a valuable roadway for some of our buses. We do have emergency personnel that can come there. It can come into the front of the school, but our traffic pattern is so congested during dismissal and drop-off that if we have an emergency, that does give us alternate access to get into the building if need be. Our phys ed classes and our recess area is that entire practice field. So that's where our students go for physical education, and they also go for recess. I think that we have a nice soccer field on the side, although I'm sure the drainage can, serve to be fixed, but I think that we have some nice field spaces. And the track, I know we did work on both tracks, but I'm pretty sure our track was completely ripped up all the way down to the base a couple of years ago, Harvey, right? And then we just recoded the high school track. So I think that, while we may be able to do some modifications to make that another practice space, my philosophy has always been to preserve as much existing space that's in good enough shape while allowing turf to give us extra space somewhere where we might not have had a usable playing field. And I think for our purposes at the middle school, the fields that we have work for us, not saying that, the high school doesn't have appropriate space to do what they need to do. I mean, if you go right now, if you came out of my building right now, there are people parked from the auxiliary gym all the way illegally parked through the back, all the way on the service road in the lower lot. So by repositioning some of this stuff and losing parking, I think if you're going to do something at the middle school, you have to put in more parking, and some of this takes away some of that parking area that you would need.
Thank you. Anyone else have?
So I want to echo what Brendan and Terry said. Certainly we need to make sure and obviously these numbers just came out today, so I understand why it's not itemized the same way, but we need to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. Jennifer and Kate both make great points in favor of the high school option, but just based on the history of how the high school got out there and the fact that the community was very strongly in favor of having the football games at the middle school, I think that's going to be a big issue to bring up with the communications committee, with the forums, and really, which isn't to say that we can't make the case of, hey, you're talking about 64 games versus 8, plus all the other ancillary safety issues and crowd control and all of that stuff. It's not to say that those things aren't mentioned, but certainly we're going to need to get community feedback on that. It's going to be a very important thing. And clearly, as you said, if it's $6 million out of 22, if it's roughly 25% of the budget, clearly we're not doing both. If we do one, because the total is $50 million. And I'd like to get, just to touch on another point, if Walter, if you could talk a little about the paving, because I'm just looking through here and seeing that as another, when you factor in all the schools, I mean, I didn't do the math, but I'm looking at, $8-10 million worth of paving. So what do we think in terms of that? Is that immediate need? Is that something that we can address short term? I know that in a previous presentation they talked about you have to take it all the way down and take the base. So obviously that's more costs more money than just putting a new seal coat or a new blacktop layer on top. Is that something that can wait till 2029? Maybe dependent upon the school, but I'd love to get some more detail on that.
Before, not to short circuit you, before we get too much into other sections that's on here, which we have to get into, there's no doubt about it. I just want to make sure that the comments, any comments on the athletic piece is done and over with, so that we can then move on to other areas. Now, obviously, there'll be no decisions on this tonight, but it's, I think it's something that, it was the elephant in the room that needed to be brought out. That, it's a discussion that happened last time. I think we have more clarity as to, some of the things you don't think of is transporting all those athletes from the high school to the middle school to play those 64 games. That's another huge ongoing cost that would be there, assuming we can get bus drivers.
Well, and you're also putting them there when her school day is not over yet.
I didn't get that.
You're putting the athletes at the building before her school day
Right.
is over with.
Right.
With nowhere to go.
Right.
So, one of the questions I had, you guys touched on them, was a traffic study being done, or a parking study. How many stalls do we have at each location, legal stalls, do we have at each locations, and can it support the 1,000 people that we're making it available to, right? You got 800 on one side, 200 on the other. And then, again, a general traffic study. If your thoroughfare needs to turn into a 2-lane road, we should do that. Make that a 2-lane legitimate thoroughfare, gives Kate the opportunity, or the middle school the opportunity, to unload students in 2 opposite. I mean, that's the premier scenario for any exodus of buses, kind of concept if you had to. The high school, unfortunately, is the worst scenario for vehicles exiting. You have one exit, that's it, on a county state right away. So you're not going to change that. So I think a traffic study wouldn't hurt, and or just to drill down on that a bit, and to know the parking capability.
A full traffic study, but I think perhaps a conversation with the local police department and to get their input might be something that would be advantageous, just in general, their opinion of traffic from the high school versus traffic from the middle school. They would be very familiar with what's going on.
And I'll add as well that what you shared with you're not going to put 2 fields in. It's just not going to happen. Just check the box, and we can probably all move on from that. I personally think it's fantastic if you could have the opportunity to have your teams practice on either turf or grass. Where are you going next week? Let's practice at the competing fields, level or conditions. I think it's incumbent on everybody here to spend the dollar the wisest. And Jim, whirling in the back of my head on the heels of the other 2 bonds were all the conversations. I don't have the history in Cornwall personally living here. Dave was my go-to as my historian. I recall all those conversations that were shared with me about started there with the high school and forget how it got there, but everybody wanted it back. So I think that feedback is critical. It would be, again, irresponsible of us too to launch something in one direction that destined to fail because it's unsupported. All
But
that.
I agree.
But that caveat of
There is-
spending the wise dollar.
Right, but there's also the piece that Jen brought up, that the public doesn't understand, that moving 4 teams a day, possibly, to down there, and then it's a good point you brought up, that the middle school is still in session when the high school would be there. So then, now the high school is using middle school facilities when the middle school could be using middle school facilities. So I hadn't thought of that last time either. That was just never brought up. Good point.
Not from here, so I don't know what you speak of as to the rationale as to why it was never put there in the first place. And I'm sure.
Money.
I'm sure somebody will tell me why they would put a high school facility at the middle school, but again, I do have the luxury of just kind of being transplanted in, and I don't have that piece of it, which is probably a good thing at this point, based on some of the reaction I'm seeing. But
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't put at the middle school. It was left at the middle school because we didn't have the money in the bond to put it at the high school.
Absolutely correct.
We didn't have the money for the bleachers, for the lights, for the whole thing.
Gotcha.
So that it wasn't a conscious, let's not do it at the high school.
Gotcha.
It was, we couldn't do it at the high school because we didn't have the dollars to do it at the
Right.
time.
Gotcha.
I just have a couple of questions. We only have one option for the field at the high school as of now. But there's no football field on the second option. So they're gonna do but no track? Is that how I'm looking at it? So it would be the soccer, baseball, football, but no track, and just leaving the track where it is?
Yeah,
that
track where it
correct?
is, yep.
So a couple of things, I 100% agree that I would love to see things at the high school. A multi-purpose field, for obviously the same reasons. I do think that we're gonna have a huge fight on our hands with the community because they like the fact that they can walk here from town. A lot of people are looking at revenue that comes in, which I kind of look at it at one of those things because really and truthfully, when the football games are going on, by the time we're done, things are closed anyway. You still have to go to Five Corners to get fast food if you didn't get something at the concession stand. So, and quite frankly, I really don't care about food after. They should be supporting our concession stand anyway, and I would love to see that to be a bigger moneymaker for our boosters and drive them to that. So that's where our fight is going to kind of be, I think, with community. I guess my question is on both of these, all four of these options, is parking. We're talking about parking, and are we putting different parking in for each of these options? Is that something that we're looking at? Because it is a nightmare.
Right, so if it were to be at the high school, we have ample parking at the high school. Any other major high school that has major athletics programs, their student parking turns into the parking that you need for your game. So high school, no additional parking would be needed. Middle school, we'd have to do some major work. I'll take any daggers coming my way, but the existing parking on grass, and unaccepeptable.
Absolutely.
That is not okay. I have young kids. I've driven through there during football games. You're playing.
It's dark.
You're playing Frogger with kids, so there needs to be some major work. So we would have to itemize that out. That we could not support as a group. Okay, we need to maintain the throughway, and that's going to be our parking. That's not okay. So we would need some additional parking, potentially taking away some grassy area. I mean, there's limited space at the middle school, but we would have to put additional parking in both middle school options.
So we would just use the student parking at the high school.
Yep, it's
And there would
perfect.
be
And then
plenty of
walk on over.
lighting for people walking down. Okay.
I would just beg to differ on concept with you. Parking at the high school is a nightmare. Getting in and out of the high school right now is a nightmare. I drive a bus every day, and it's a nightmare. We don't even have parking for graduation. We have to bus people in. So what would you do if you had 500-600 cars for a game? How would you do it? I don't even know how you would conceptually do it without adding parking.
I would argue middle school is equally, if not worse.
But you have enough room to put parking in at the middle school.
I just want to know where and how much.
We own where the basketball court is now on Lee Road. That whole field goes all the way to the woods. We own all the way from there to Lee Road. I mean, it doesn't have to be,
Space.
No, you wouldn't.
Play.
A little bit, but there's a lot of woods there too. Well, we do it now, Larry. I know it's not the best. I know that. But we've never had a big event at the high school, have we? That we parked?
Yeah, so Dave, every year at our opening day, we have every staff member in the whole district goes to the high school, and it is a little bit rough to get out of there, but we probably have 600 employees that go to the high school on the, like, at least the first day, or in a couple weeks, we're gonna have our superintendent's conference day. So I think that we have had really big groups of people. You know, my concern, and I know you're at the games and stuff, is just, like Terry said, it's, at least at the high school, they're in a parking spot and there's a road. I feel like there's kind of this drive anywhere you can. You have four-wheel drive, pop it into four-wheel drive and get across. And I think that's what we're trying to get away from a little bit.
I get what you're saying. I know. I've been there forever. But it's also because a lot of times the lot doesn't get used. The lot doesn't get used and the lot should get used. But mainly because the crossover between school ending and the time of the game being at 7 o'clock, there's still people left in the parking lot. But people from the outside don't park in the parking lot because they're not accustomed to doing that.
And something that we can have, back to Brendan's point, I think a needed next step, if Tetra Tech, hopefully we didn't lose you, is thinking through the parking scenarios. So now that we have the schematics for 2 options at the middle school, that would be another, to Brendan's point, another a la carte. If it were at the middle school, parking would have to be an added line here. So this group would be able to look at the price tag and put that into the full equation. So 2 different options where parking could go with the 2 middle school options. We can further itemize. The high school option is missing the track. So those are really important pieces to
Was the
come back
track, in this plan, is the track at the middle school being replaced? It is.
I think what's important here is my estimate included work at both of the sites. So what it included at the middle school was a brand new stadium complex, soup to nuts, everything. And then the reason for more of the piecemeal approach at the high school was because we kept the track. We're keeping the lighting, and all we're doing is replacing the lighting with LEDs. They're putting the stands in. There was a thought to try to keep that in place. If you guys are looking at a plan like option 1, where you're saying you want the full athletic complex at the high school, I think what would be important to know is, do you do synthetic at the middle school? Because vice versa, that's what my plan shows, or that's what the scope shows. Right now, we're doing a full athletic complex at the middle school, but we're also doing synthetic in the middle of the track at the high school. Vice versa, if you do option 1 here, do you really need synthetic at the middle school? Or then do you just regrade that, keep the field, regrade it, make it nice, maybe even throw some irrigation there, but it's less than what I'm talking.
I think need is a relative term for that second field, and that would be a discussion that we would have here. Once, do we do that second field, whether it's one or the other, or do we just refurbish a grass field? And that, again, is a discussion to be had when the time comes.
Well, and this option really doesn't talk to that. So when option 1, when I look at this, it doesn't say what you're doing at the middle school, or vice versa. Really what needs to happen is option 1, we're doing this at the high school, middle school. Option 2, high school, middle school. Option.
Right.
What this does, it really talks to an option at the high school, but with this option here, you would inherently do less at the middle school.
Because that's what you were presented with. That's where we left off.
That's right. So we're doing both, right. We're doing work at both sites. Yeah.
Hey, one thing that we should keep in mind, and Jen, you brought it up, it was the cost, or the issue anyway, of bringing all those players to the middle school. That's not an itemized list or an item that would be on the bond, but it's still something that we need to consider as a variable. I don't want to add to your list, Harvey, but it would I think you would be the person who would have the best idea of, like, how much is that really, because I think the point is great. We can't just do this for the high school kids and say, or for the football team and say, this is a $6.5 million project to benefit 8 games a year. Like, we have to maximize its value, but then it brings up that incidental cost of transportation. So having an idea of what that is, just a ballpark, obviously, so because it is, as Larry said, it's an ongoing cost. It's not something that we just pay for out of this bond.
Yeah, that would have to be something we'd work up. I couldn't even
Oh,
ballpark it.
I know that, and I wouldn't even, a ballpark just so we can have an idea, it doesn't have to, be figured out for the next 20 years,
I'll
but-
get back to you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's the argument for turf against, for grass against turf too, and now we have to practice off the complex all the time, and it's not free. So we're paying to go off the complex to practice a lot. Not free.
True.
Practice?
Varsity football,
No, they practice at the
they pay to go off all the time.
Now, this year.
When they get closer in season, I know that they've gone to Goshen and they go to the Armory.
I
But-
assume that if you're not getting a building, they're paying for it themselves, because they go to the Armory and practice all the time.
On rainy days, they have gone one time this year to the Armory. And I know from Coach, when they get closer, because some games are on the turf field, they will go over to Goshen and ask for practice time there, but they have not charged them to do that.
Well, in the past, we've also paid a lot to play at Mount Airy soccer before you.
Okay, I think we've got a good handle on what we expect in feedback from Lou and possibly Tetra Tech.
Just one other question for the architects. When we come up with the options, it would be good to know where the concession stand would sit. That'll let me know, are we going gravity to an existing field? Are we pumping to the building? Just so where's it sit? And so we can figure out those costs, because, it really is important to understand where that concession stand is going to go in this plan.
In the high school?
Both plans, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure, we can get that to you. Anything else on this for now? Okay. Jim, you wanted to talk about pavement?
Paving, yeah.
Yeah,
Big expense at all the schools.
yes.
But again, they talked about to get the reimbursement, you're digging all the way down and digging out the subgrade and refilling it, so.
Yeah,
Is there any that can be put off, that we can throw an inch or two of asphalt on top and kick it down the road to 2029?
Well, again, I always speak towards strategic planning. And, while we're having this conversation here, I remind everybody, and we're not just looking at this bond here, but we have to look 10 years out. And we don't really know the scope of work yet, and I have not had a conversation with the architects or the site engineers or the designers on as-built conditions, solutions, costs, best practices. I have an idea from my point of view, from my experience, which, I'll throw that on the table and have that blended conversation with them. But I do see phasing on it. I do know Lee Road is in desperate need of help. I do know Cornwall and Hudson, similarly over at Willow Avenue. I think that we can salvage the middle school, do a little work over in the bus loop, same at the high school. I think there are areas that need paving that don't have it right now, that would be, beneficial to us and the community. So I think it warrants having a good half day with the architects and designers and kind of picking their brain and listing things out and seeing what we could afford. And then, and then putting those other things that are on a lower priority, you know, out 3, 7, 8 years.
Okay, could I charge you with that mission?
Every day,
Okay.
Larry, on that paving note, it was mentioned at the last meeting, other methods of remediating the asphalt. Lou, I believe these numbers, by the terms, represent a full removal and full replacement?
This is a full depth replacement under the bus loop. We're going down 12 inches of subbase. Under the parking areas, we're doing 8. And then your standard top, your binder and top. So, you know, I agree. I think, and we have talked about this. I think that there was a discussion as to whether if you did less work, you could get the 8. I think that's an important conversation because I do believe in past projects we've been able to do a milling operation.
Yeah.
Or reclaiming some material and still getting some aid. So
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing if
that's
there's
not
a-
in here, but
Yeah,
yeah,
if there's value there, savings there, because, you know,
absolutely, because you're exporting thousands of yards of material and importing thousands of yards of material. For some of the sizes of these projects, you reclaim on site, and as long as we don't have too large of aggregate, we can do a good job there.
yeah, it's the petroleum-based product that drives the price.
That's
so,
right.
You know,
That's
here's
right.
that price. If we could
Yeah.
avoid that petroleum product and reclaim that, or,
Well, and the other, and you're right, and the gas does drive this as well, because as a site contractor, if you're exporting all this material, you gotta export it somewhere, right? And if your yard is close, then your costs are less, but your trucking, when you're looking at thousands of yards of material, that can be a significant cost on a project like this. So it's,
so in sympathy to Walter's needs of these areas that have been, you know, limped along for the years, I wonder if there's another creative option that we could pursue pricing-wise, just to lay apples and apples against each other from a reclamation operation or a milling operation.
absolutely. I think there are definitely other ways to look at this.
Okay.
Right now, I looked at it worst case. I think that working with Tetra Tech, maybe we come up with some other options that you still get the aid,
Yeah.
but we're still able to reuse some of your material. And I said this at the last meeting, when I drive around, I'm looking for major depressions, major failure in that sub base. It'll show itself based on water infiltration or whatnot. There's a couple areas that really show itself, but generally speaking, you got a pretty, I mean, here, when you come in, you see the cracking and everything else from what was an irrigation line for the farmland. So you see that. I think that's something you're gonna have to, you have to address that. And that's part of this, but there's other lots that can just be taken down, brought back up, and I think they'd last for a while.
The other piece that I just want to say is, if, you know, this number on here, I know it's a lot, and it's taking it all, it's $5.5 million at the middle school. And I think if we're going to invest so much money, we have to solve any problems that we have. It shouldn't just be a straight replacement of what we had. It would have to address the parking, the congestion, the traffic, the bus loop, in and out, all of that stuff that we deal with on a regular basis. I think that would, for that price tag, we should be really happy with the solution, what we came to.
A big part of this project was the widening of the entrance to give you parking and more circulation coming into the middle school. That was the first part of it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's some big money in there for additional work, not just keeping it status quo.
Yeah, I mean, so I would invite, Harvey's been and Terry's been for our entry in the morning. We have 30 buses and 500 parents dropping kids off every morning. And, you know, we're lucky that nobody gets hit. So, I mean, just to try to, if this is the only way it can be done on that property, then that's one thing. But I think we're going to put $5.5 million into something. We really have to say that we took a look at all of the concerns that we have.
We were once given some options on how to reconfigure the front of the middle school. Might be something to share with it. Anybody, I seem to remember at the last meeting, there was a question at Willow, no, COH, about the parapet. Somebody had mentioned the facade up on top of the building. Is it, working on it, is it cosmetic, or is it because it's going to fall down and kill somebody?
Well, Larry, the exterior masonry really needs to be examined and repointed. The parapet wall, which is really the wall that flies up past the roof on the top of the building, if you take a look at it, you could see a lot of the mortar joints are starting to spall, meaning they're popping out of the joint. It's that freeze thaw and the way that the sun is not there, and then the sun comes up over the mountain and then heats it, and it thaws, and then it refreezes. So there's a good amount of pointing work that needs to be done on that building. In addition to the windows, we have the steel lintels that are above the windows, and that holds the masonry weight above the window. A lot of those lintels are rusting. Some could be scraped and painted, but some others need to be replaced. We'll only be able to identify that once we get up there. So working with the architects and the scope of work package, there'll probably be an allowance, within that buy. But as far as the parapet wall, it's that the outside of the building that's above the roof line, and really examining that and.
So in answer to the question that was brought up at the other meeting, it's not cosmetic that you're talking about?
No, because my concern as your director of facilities is if one of those mortar joints happens to pop out at the right time, at the right moment when someone is walking, and
Right.
I wouldn't want to see that happen. So
Right.
I think it would be our responsibility to really address that maintenance need to that building, and now is the time.
Larry, I just have a question generically. At the high school, probably, Walt, this is you or Lou, under building 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down, replace the cowl walls in the stairwell. I've never heard of a cowl wall.
So CalWall it's a product name like Kleenex. So when you want a tissue, you say Kleenex, but it could be Walmart or some other brand. So CalWell is actually it's actually a brand. It's a manufacturer, and it's if you can envision the 3-story classroom building, and the north and south ends where the stairwells are. There's this translucent, looks like a plastic panel that is on 2 ends. That's the CalWall panel. Now, what's happened? It's failed over time, and the pollen and the organics have gotten in between it. And when you take a look at it, you could see the green. Okay, so it's not operating the way it was originally designed. So that really needs to be removed and replaced. So that's what that line item.
And that represents, I guess that represents replacing of the cowl wall or an alternate product that won't degrade over that time?
Cowl wall has gotten better over the years. It also depends on exposure to the sun, so I'd have to see the elevation that it's being hit as far as exposure and UV degradation. But cowl wall is an expensive product, and I think just for the look and feel, we're replacing in kind. So you got 2,500 square feet of that product. And right now, I can buy that product installed anywhere between $120 to $150 a foot. I'm holding $135 a foot for that product right now installed.
All right, thank you.
Now, Lou, just to kind of add to that, I would want to have a conversation with our designers and kind of pick their brain on what materials are out there, what they recommend. and speak with Lou Palumbo as well, and really see what is the best product for our building, for the best price. So, moving forward, we would see if there was an alternate. Now, I'm okay with that, as long as the performance is equal or if not better.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
One general point or request, just of the entire committee, it would be helpful to have this list ranked in terms of, not just where it is and how much it costs, but proximity to failure, how it impacts safety. Like obviously, like when you mentioned, something falling on a student's head, like that would not have occurred to me. So just so we can start slicing this discussion in different ways. And maybe it's not something, I'm not trying to create homework for anybody, but just so we can start framing these issues, these concerns in a different light, because we've got to try to get down from 50 to 20, and there's going to be a lot of different ways to skin that cat.
Correct me if I'm wrong, isn't this the list that consists of health and safety concerns? Basic health-
This is that.
Yeah, I think this is.
So at this point, it's sort of like they're all at that phase.
Now,
Is
I
that how
think these are all the level 8 to 10 concerns?
Right,
Like, is it,
right.
now we're looking at 8.1, 8.4,
Right,
9.2, 9, you know what I mean? So I think this is that health and safety.
Well,
Yeah, so if I could jump in, this is really the bottom of the funnel that we put the building condition survey in. So all of these items here, they weren't, derived by just anyone. This was when the architects went through, and they took a full 12, 13 months to examine each one of our buildings, go through their so-called discovery process. And all of this information is online, PDF, in the building condition survey. So what we did was, we put it through that funnel, and these are the, those top priority, task descriptions, however you want to call it, that came out at the end.
Then was asking, I'm looking at the high school, which is our newest building. Didn't say a new building. You have in here replaced both boilers. Didn't one fail already?
That's correct. So we have 3 boilers, the Well McLean. They're hot water boilers with a life expectancy of 20 years. And we do chemically treat our water system at the school. We do take very good care of our equipment. We do have an extensive preventative maintenance program. Unfortunately, our number 2 boiler failed, and insurance picked up that cost, and we are replacing it. But again, it's important to, again, strategically plan for the future. Keep those items, front and center. Even if we don't do those now, we can't forget about them. But yes, 20-year-old.
If one of the 3 failed, and they're identical boilers?
All 3 are identical.
Okay.
Triplets, if I may.
One might say that looking at those other 2 boilers as a short lifespan coming up.
So I will say that is very important, but in comparison, when we examine the boilers over at Cornwall and Hudson, which were originally steam boilers, and in '03 were converted over to hot water, the designers never took in consideration the 4 stories of head pressure for a hot water system, in which we have difficulty getting that hot water, and those are sectional boilers too, which we've had failures in those sections as well. So, I would, understanding that there's not an unlimited supply of funding or money, I would propose that those 2 boilers are replaced before we go over to the high school boilers, because of the issue of getting heat at times up to the top of the house of that building.
Well, and that's where we would rely on your input.
Yeah.
Yes.
Walter, you mentioned insurance was paying for one of those. Would that be the case for, I'm sure that, none of this is the preferable way of handling this, but would that be the case for the other one, if the other ones failed as well? Like, what are the limitations of that?
It's really all based on policy and the situation in which the failure occurred. All right, so we had some micro fissure cracking on the top head of the sections. I don't want to get into the engineering on that, but we were fortunate enough through a very laborious, challenging way of, during COVID, to get the approval from our insurance company. So we are very fortunate on that. I can't speak about the future and what would happen, and if insurance would pick up everyone. I would not think so. Again, I think it would be our responsibility to go into this cycle of replacing equipment, which we should be doing.
Yeah, that's good context. Thank you.
So, and Brendan and I didn't meet before this meeting, but we're on the same page all night. When I met with Harvey, my head was where Brendan's was, so we know that this is a high priority list. It has to get even more whittled down. So if you look at the price tag just of the middle school minus athletic facility, that's 16 million. We're not putting 16 million into the middle school. What my team is also trying to make sure that we're navigating with this committee is, if we ask Walter for his 15 top, he'll give you his 15 top, but we don't want this to turn into the Walter list or the Harvey list or the Terry list. It's what information does the committee need to really start to make those tough decisions, because we're not going to be able to address everything. There's going to be pissed off people around the table that your item didn't make the cut, but it's really the committee making a recommendation to the board, and we were trying to like backwards map. So I think Brendan said, what if the board voted in January on scope? That would mean this committee would really be making a recommendation to the board before we go on winter break. So in the next 2 months, what does the committee need from Walter, from Tetra Tech, from Lou, to really start to cross some things off, or to start whittling this list down? So I'm hearing some refinement of, I think Tetra Tech said this, and I think some other committee members said this. We don't want to get into a list where, we can't quite do this, so what if we did it 50%? Just to get it on the list. I heard that from the committee. We don't want to get into all of those becoming, what if we didn't quite do X, Y, or Z? So I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way to get information to the committee. We have the building condition survey. We know what was unsatisfactory, and we have the expertise of Walter. If you ask Walter for what has to happen tomorrow, he will give you what has to happen tomorrow. I just want to make sure that we're being fully transparent, that would be the committee asking Walter for that. I don't want to hear, well, Walter put this on the list, that's why we got it. So I just don't know if there's other things that would be helpful for the committee outside of what Brendan's question is where my head was. If I'm looking at all the boilers that need replacing, what are the top 2 that have to be done in this bond, or we're going to be paying for it anyway? Are there is paving, does that make the cut for unsatisfactory safety-wise, or is that a long-term planning type issue? So that's just kind of where my head was this afternoon.
Absolutely, I agree. So these are the highest priority needs, but we need to have that whittled down even more. And so that would be most helpful, that to keep this list, but whether everything is given a number, and so we could say, okay, here's the list, and this is the one, and that's it. Or if someone thought it was better to readjust how this appeared to us, that would be okay too. But I think we do need to look at what are the most urgent needs. The athletic facilities is a separate thing. And we know that that's pretty, urgent also, but not a safety thing within a school building. But I understand about the safety involved with the athletic fields. So I think that, yeah, it would be helpful for us to know, even though these are the highest priority items, we understand that, what needs to be the number one, what are the ones on the highest priority item, and so forth.
Walter made a good analogy. We have 4 boilers that need to be replaced. 2 got to be replaced. 2 should be replaced. And from this list, we wouldn't know that. So that's where we would need input, knowing that we wouldn't know that the boilers at COH can't pump heat to the top floor.
So if I could add, Lou with Palumbo put together a document for us with order of magnitude numbers here, with very little detail other than spending about 4 hours with me last week going through the buildings, maybe 5. I think it would be helpful once Tetra Tech starts to detail some of these items here, and Lou, working with Barb, can start to refine these numbers. Just by my experience, these numbers are dynamic, and once Lou really knows what the scope of work is, because he's just going on what's in this box, basically, and giving us, a number for guidance. I do see that changing. I would like to hear from Barb. Are you still out there, Barb?
Yes, I am.
And Lou, could we hear a little dialogue between you and Lou about as we detail the scope and how Lou's numbers will kind of ride along with that detail and that dynamics of the cost analysis? Could you guys talk a little bit about that to us?
Barb, before you get into that, could you guys put your faces back on the screen? It's nicer than talking
Michael,
to
you
the
have
high
to
school
stop
field.
sharing the screen.
Okay. I can stop sharing then.
Yep.
Right? Okay. Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
So, I guess I'd start by asking Lou what you need, and/or do you have the true building condition survey with all those written recommendation and/or more background about existing systems? That might be a great place to start, but maybe you already have it.
I think the building condition survey is definitely a great starting point. And what's also going to be helpful is a stop and start with certain scopes of work. A good example would be the bathrooms. If we're doing the bathrooms because of plumbing issues, where does that stop? Does it stop out right at the bathrooms, or is it a building level issue? Is there more there that, and it's not just one way. I'd love to see the numbers go down, but as we get into this, it's possible that a number goes up because we say, we didn't think about that. So I think what I'm going to get into is when we talk about replacement of boilers, I put a guess in. I knew that high school size is going to have 3 boilers. I knew the size of those boilers. But above and beyond that, what I'll probably do is say, okay, are we replacing pumps? What else? Are we doing any work with the above and beyond with the existing breaching? So I'll get into a little more detail there as to what our needs are. In each one of these, I'll probably do that. And it's just part of the dance that we have to do. I think when we, just backing up, the sports field options I think are pretty important because that's going to really dictate. There's a lot of money that's being spent between the 2 schools right now and these options. So once we figure out where we're going there, I think that's going to be really helpful. Going through the rest of the scopes of work, again, the site work, we talked about that. I may talk to you guys about where we might be able to scale back that work, or did I estimate a little bit too much? I think starting with square footage, I'll probably come to you guys and talk about, for example, I got, the front loop at 60,000 square feet. Is that correct? Should it be less? I got the staff parking at 70,000 square feet. Is that a good area that we're working with? The assumption is we're working with existing square footage. At the rear of the building, I also have 20,000 square feet that we're working on. So there is a lot of parking and sidewalk work, curbing work that we're doing at the middle school. So I think we can get down into that. The roofing work, I guess the question's going to be right there is, are we going down to the deck? If we are, is there any asbestos in the roof? Right now, none of my numbers really talk to any hard hazmat except for places where I put in an allowance. So I know at the district office, we have asbestos that's associated with the HVAC system. We also know that in the middle school, there's asbestos more than likely associated with the locker room renovations as well. So I put some allowances in for those specific areas. But when we talk about window replacements, for example, over at Willow, I don't have any money in there for asbestos abatement. So those are the kind of things I may come back and just let's get into more detail on those things. And then.
Right, I'm also thinking, just some of what I'm hearing tonight of looking at what some of the recommendations were within the building condition survey. Let's take, for example, the pavement. Was that a straight replacement versus what we're hearing tonight is if we're going to spend that money, we need to be doing some traffic studies and reconfiguring and more parking. So we want to make sure, do those square yardage include that, and maybe we need to do some sketches. So we both saw each other's stuff for the first time this afternoon. So for me to get these numbers to my team and have them starting to look at that next level of detail and trying to flesh out these not even full sentences describing what the work is and seeing if it's in alignment with what was in the building condition survey, what we might recommend, et cetera, and starting to build these out.
One of the things I would suggest is touch base with Harvey. Theoretically, someday we're going to have new building entrances put in through a grant, security entrances. Some of that may do what you have here. So it just, just touch base with Harvey as to exactly what.
Larry, can I jump in? I'd recommend a couple things. So we're kind of 30,000 feet hovering, and we're not coming down, right? I don't feel that we're coming down. I don't. Unfortunately, Barb, I'm sorry, but I don't like the idea that you guys collaborated on a document this afternoon before our meeting. I wish you guys had more time for that. So moving forward, I see 9 weeks between now and the end of the year. That includes Thanksgiving week. That gives us an opportunity for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings if we meet every other week. We have the high school, the middle school, 3 elementary schools, and buildings and grounds and the DO to talk about. I would recommend that we take this very nebulous document and we try to hone this in and isolate it and accomplish a chunk at a time. Between now and 10/26, let's work with Lou, give Lou a focal point, not the whole document, a focal point. Let's call it, I would recommend buildings and grounds / DO. Low-hanging fruit. There's not a lot of money laying there. And that'll shake the bugs out of our system before we get to upper end, more high-profile items. High school, $12 million. Middle school, $22 million. Again, that includes the field stuff and big ticket items. We got to start checking boxes and whittling this thing down, or else we're going to keep spinning and talking nebulous. So I'd recommend that we pick whichever. You want to talk about all 3 elementary schools in a block? We have 5 meetings. I say we use 4 of them to focus on the high school is 1 meeting, middle school is another meeting, elementary schools a 3rd meeting, buildings and grounds and the DO is a 4th meeting. That should be a relatively, straightforward, leaves a lot of room for overflow in the meeting, I think, and leaves a 5th meeting for who couldn't make it, the snow happened, and, pick an item. Give us an overflow item. That's what I'd recommend, pushing this forward, and giving Lou a focal point with the team here at Tetra Tech, a focal point. All right, they know our flavor now. They know the questions that we're gonna have the ability to ask and we'll ask in the detail level. And let's hone it in. Pick a school, knock it out, check, and move on past it.
Can I add to that? I totally, I'm right there with you. We've got to find some sort of like rubric to get this down. And you know, we were talking before about listing by safety or whatever. I think that knowing that that data is in the building condition survey, I think like we're all looking at things that we can be doing between now and the next meeting. Go back, get that building condition survey. Maybe we should share it out to everybody who's in the committee. I know we have access to it. And then just, you know, start getting a sense of what the needs are, and that they're all needs. But then a second thing, and this is just occurring to me now, you know, a couple of people have mentioned, rightly so, we want to make sure that we're helping as many kids as possible with this money. And one way of looking at that, like for instance, there could be, I'm sure there are buildings that have more need per building, but from a fairness standpoint, it would not be right to give a disproportionate amount of money to a particular school when, especially one of the elementary schools, let's say, when it would only serve a small portion of the community. So trying to find ways, starting with a fair approach of distributing the money and then working backwards. Let's say it's $22 million, right? Let's take the athletic fields off the table for the sake of this like mental exercise. Let's say it turns out to be $6 million. That leaves $16 million. It just, not saying we stick to these numbers, you know, religiously. I say, okay, we have $16 million left, maybe based on student population, say 11, 12 million of that should go to the high school and middle school needs because that's where everybody goes, and the other $4 or $5 million will be dispersed among the three elementary schools. Just doing the math really quickly, that's about the percentages that it falls down to, the needs break out to anyway, so it's not like we're leaving anybody out. But this just allows us, when you go through these schools, to say, okay, instead of I've got $22 million and I've got this extraordinary amount of needs, you go to a school and say, okay, based on this, I've got $4 million to work with, whatever that is. What can I start picking out that will fit into that $4 million? Just different ways of making this a digestible exercise as we go through, as opposed to, oh my God, we have $50 million and $20 million of budget. How do we make that happen? Just as a suggestion. Nobody has to follow that. I'm just, in the interest of how do we mentally move this along, that could be a helpful model.
Well,
There's a little bit of theory in what you just said, I feel, because we have to be cognizant of the fact that there are going to be failures in buildings. If you only put a per capita amount in a building, the needs could still be far greater in terms of emergencies and failures, and that's really of
100%. I'm not saying that this is the final litmus test. I'm saying when you're trying to wrap your head around, I'm just saying realistically saying, okay, we can't spend $10 million at CES, right? Maybe we can spend 2 or 3. I don't have it all itemized out. And then certainly, you know, you whittle the list down, and then when we get to further discussions, you say, well, actually, this one is a critical failure and it's a safety issue. Obviously, that will be taken into account. I'm just mentally trying to offer ways that we can get beyond this initial hump of, you know, this paralysis where we're looking at this and saying, what do we cut?
So again, I want to make sure that the committee knows that our team serves at your pleasure. So I like the idea of scoping out meetings. And again, I go back to what I said. What does this committee need by way of information to make some really important decisions? So that's kind of where our team is at. Second thing, I do want to think of working backwards. So something good, you know, Lewis put on the table 5 different meetings. Is that enough? The scope is the most critical part of this equation. So if we don't get the scope right, I don't care what we do from January until May, it's just not going to work out, or we're going to get more feedback and then be right back at this table saying, oh, we're hearing a lot from this part of the community that we need to add this. So I do want to have a little bit of dialogue on, you know, what board vote on scope, working backwards, then we can really wrap our head around what's needed. And then just lastly, just to shout out to Barb and Lou, just remember they're new to the family. So I think we brought Lou on at the end of September, so he's maybe had 3 weeks. So he's kind of doing what our previous architect had years to kind of get under the hood and really understand what's going on. So we also want to make sure that we're giving Lou time to really give us the estimates that we're looking for. We don't want to repeat past mistakes. So the last thing we want to do is we thought it was going to be 4.2, but it's really 3.2. That's another $1 million that we could have put in somewhere else. Same with Tetra Tech. They're new to the family. So how do we give ourselves time to really get scope right? Because for me, nothing else matters more than getting the scope correct. I like Brendan's perspective. I mean, no matter what we do, there will be someone that comes out to say, well, COH got the short end of the stick. We have to be able to articulate the rationale behind some of the decisions that we're making. So I don't know if that's if there's time for that, but I don't know if January is the right date for a board vote. And then how much runway do we need from vote on scope to really pump out the PR and marketing machine to make sure that we're getting the information solidified. So that's just something to consider.
When do we need to take a board vote? Is there a legally mandated period? I would assume there is prior to the bond being offered.
The requirement we have, there's certain disclosure deadlines that we have to adhere to that work backwards from the date of the vote. As far as the board making a decision, January on the surface gives us plenty of time before May. The problem is that once the board gives the okay, there's a lot of PR that needs to be done in between.
I guess to ask the question another way, what's the last possible date that the board could vote?
The one key requirement is a 45-day notice before the day of the vote. That's one big one. I can get a timeline for the committee for that purpose of what the legal requirements are.
Is we would need enough time to promote what we're doing.
Right.
So we're talking January, February latest.
Well, what I was going to say was if you're talking January, you could also think the second meeting in January and not the
Right.
first meeting in
Sure.
January. So that just gives you a little bit more room and to see how that goes.
Yeah, I'm not arguing in favor of waiting until April to vote. I'm just trying to theoretically understand,
yeah.
Where we're at and, yeah.
You know,
Because,
I was
I echo Terry's sentiment that if we don't get this half right, the second half
Right.
doesn't matter. It's a waste of time.
But I've been listening to this little bug in my ear over here. And I like the idea of breaking it out, high school, middle school, elementary school. The only difference
Can I just
would-
ask, do we want to do it building by building, or do we want to do it do we want to do boilers and heating systems one week, and then windows and exterior building shells another week, and asphalt, parking, pave, and then that maybe allows you to think about those things between buildings? Or do we want to attack it building by building?
Another way.
We could do bathrooms one time. It doesn't matter to me at all. It was just maybe taking into account what was said about thinking about between the buildings. If we looked at systems that might allow that a little more.
My personal opinion is we're going to burn a week creating a new document for us to organize against. That's the only thing I would say, Barb. I mean, you can, any one of us can pull out whatever item we want to pull out and
I'm just looking at it. You said we have 5 meetings. We got site work, building, mechanical, plumbing, athletics.
yeah, my
yeah.
point is, then you take this document and you on your own in the next 2 weeks, cycle out what you interpret as a topic. I cycle out what I interpret as a topic versus Barb and or Lou generating a document and saying, all right, they've compartmentalized it and given it to us. I just feel like we're burning up another week. Another meeting.
So Larry, the only thing that I would want to say, Terry asked, what do we need as a committee? What do we need? I think the biggest thing that we need as a committee is to know what are the numbers that are attached to the athletic proposals. Because there's a really big difference between putting turf inside the brand new field inside the new track at the middle school versus some of these configurations and what it's going to entail. And I think that's going to be the first piece, if that's an important point that needs to be in this proposition, is the athletic facilities. That should be the first thing that we come to terms with, and then we move backwards through everything else. And the scope of this work is so vastly different for each one of these, plus the other ones of putting turf inside a track and leaving everything the way it is, that you could be 2 or 3 times the cost of one to the other. And I think that, for me, that's the first thing that I would need to know, would be what do these things look like? And then, like Terry said, like, this is what it looks like for how much it costs for scoreboards, for lights, for the turf, for an 8-lane track. I mean, even if it's not, a different configuration, but in general, an 8-lane track will be X number of dollars. Well, that might put us over the edge, and we could spin our wheels for 2 weeks talking about that, and it's not something that's ever going to happen. So I think that's what I need to help facilitate my thought process.
Which is why I originally brought up the athletic facility first. That really should be gotten out of the way. Again, it becomes, do we do it, where does it show up? And I think if we can have broken down numbers for the middle school and broken down numbers for the high school, we can then, as you said, do comparisons. And then bringing in the unknowns, like transportation, those types of things. There are certain decisions I think that we're going to need to make and recommend that won't necessarily be a dollars and cents out of the bond. When we take a look, and I'm just going to use transportation as an example, that's an ongoing expense. Another example is high school kids using the middle school facilities while the middle school is in session. And that's another piece to keep in mind, and that's some of the stuff that we, in coming to our recommendation, those are the kinds of things that is above dollars and cents. It becomes more than just looking at this piece of the pie is less expensive than this piece of the pie, therefore let's do this. Because now we're doing penny wise and pound foolish, and we're back to where we were 20 years ago when we didn't do it right at the high school. I don't want to do that again. I don't want to have this recommendation coming out of here that we did it because it was cheaper. We want to do it because it's right, or not do it. That's my opinion on that. Okay. What I was going to say about Lewis over here is that instead of doing the high school first, I would do the elementary schools first, giving them more time to deal with the high school and the middle school because they are bigger, and they would need more time to work out those numbers.
This is just, I isolated these into groups.
Yeah,
I would recommend doing the district office of building grounds first. Again, because it'll probably be the easiest to decide.
My guess is we do them in
We'll
15,
go right
20
through
minutes.
it, and then the group will get a flavor for
Right.
how we're going to proceed.
Then perhaps the elementary school DOB and the rest of it in the first meeting, and then maybe use the second meeting as an overflow.
It's maybe I'm wrong. It was my understanding that we couldn't get the same aid rate on non-instructional buildings.
Yes, 'cause I can't see who.
Correct.
Right.
I was going to say the same thing. I would start on the things that you know you're going to get state aid on, like your concession stands, your bathrooms, your things like that. You're not getting state aid on that. So when you start focusing on some of these things, and like your administrative building and your buildings and grounds, they're not included in your return rate. So, no disrespect, they should kind of be there. I mean, and truthfully, I'm looking at the big scope of your issues. I consider it a blessing that anything athletic is on this list to begin with, based on everything that is there. But there are things, and I think, Barb, you addressed at the last meeting, that definitely you're not going to get aid on. So if you start with those two things, you have to know it must be the top of the top because we're not going to get that aid back.
Right, but there's also goes back to the things that are deteriorating. The roof on the administration building needs to be replaced. So our question then comes in, if we take a look at this document, he has it replaced with slate. Well, we could get stuff that looks like slate instead, a whole lot cheaper. And that's the discussion we can have here. So if we do the district office building and grounds and the elementary schools in that first meeting, then we could use the second meeting as an overflow for the elementary schools and then go into either the high school. High school has less to do to it than the middle school does.
So can I, because I want to own, again, we're trying to manage what the committee needs and expectations. So part of the issue with, you know, Barb seeing Lou's tonight and Lou seeing Barb tonight is, I mean, it's a huge ask to say, hey, what are all the possibilities for athletics in the complex? What can you draw up? In the meantime, Lou is spending time with Walter trying to get under the hood. So can we have a meeting with Lou and Barb just to see what, I think all 3 elementary schools is not going to be feasible by the next meeting, but could they send Larry what they feel that they could accomplish? Larry sends it out to the group, and then everyone knows kind of what to expect next one. But all the while, you know, Lewis has a great point. How are we marching forward? Like, let's limit the scope, get under the hood and under a few things, but I just don't want to commit tonight to all 3 elementary schools. Is just, I know we won't deliver on that.
I think these couple of meetings we've had were necessary to get moving. Sometimes you got to get the chaff away before you get to the wheat. Yes.
Could we get Lou and Barb to vote on, doing it by school or by functional area? And the only reason is because Barb brought up the functional area. The only reason I come back to that, I just want to make sure we fully flesh that point out, is because we compared boilers in one school to the other, and that would have gotten lost if we had done it on a per school basis. And that may be a one-off, and maybe, you know, we don't want to structure a whole process on something that was a one-off, but I'd love to get Lou's input and Barb's input on going through it school by building or area by area.
You want me to go? I
guess I was just thinking if part of the discussion was going to be trying to get equity between school, equity might be the wrong word, but if you're trying to get that sense, if you do it building by building, then we're just going to need to you might make decisions that you then need to revisit at the end because now you feel that you might have disproportionately spent at one building versus another because you were doing them in different buckets that way. But it's ultimately all going to end up at the same finish line. But it just might also give us a more focused team of people if we're looking at a system versus a building.
And I like looking at the scopes. I like looking at commonality across the schools so that we're talking about something that's going to be, again, common. You look at your mechanical upgrades. What's our approach to the mechanical upgrades at each school? Let's make sure we're taking the same approach. The bathroom upgrades across the schools, if they're really important, let's make sure we're taking the same approach. If site work and circulation, in particular to busing and parent drop-off, is a big problem, let's make sure that we're talking about the remediation of that problem across all the schools.
It might also let us focus on some things that take a little bit less design time up front and do those first and push ones that might take a little bit more design time to later in the cycle. So, you know, we can look at things like roofs and building envelopes or something like that first, or it doesn't matter the order, but something where we might be doing traffic studies and site layouts, having that at a later meeting to give more time to get in place the studies, to gather the data that we need to maybe come up with some sketches for new parent drop-offs or things like that.
I can say that the athletic discussion is going to be one that's going to carry on. At every district that we've had this part of a bond, it goes right to the end, and you're always going to have someone that says, well, we should have done a natural turf as opposed to a synthetic, or we shouldn't have put it in a certain place. That's going to happen, and I think that discussion is going to go right to the end. We can knock out whether a roof needs, it's past its useful life. Let's take care of it. Let's knock it off the list. The building envelope things, you know, we talked about Willow, we talked about the masonry. There's some no-brainer items here that we can just check off the list that should be done when you look at building envelope, windows, masonry repair, and things like that. With districts, we've gone both ways. I think also, just backing up, looking at the numbers, everyone needs to understand, the vote occurs, if it occurs, it's May of 2022. The design doesn't get completed, submitted to SED until potentially spring or fall, winter of 2022, first phase. We start bidding it in the spring of 2023. I'm not building until the summer of 2023, summer of 2024. That's how far out we're projecting. So it's really important for the committee to understand that the bond, once it passes in 2022, the earliest we're starting any construction is the spring, summer of 2023. So we've already lost a whole year of inflation, right? Buying capability, and we have to wait till SED says we're okay to go out to bid. So that's part of what we have to do as a team to try to figure out the numbers. We're trying to project out in this game as well.
All right, so we have two methods here, either by building or by subject, if you will. I made a note saying the building envelope. Maybe that would be the first thing that anything that includes the building envelopes, because if that's not secure, the building's not secure. So if the roof fails, it doesn't matter if we replace the boiler.
So to this point, I think, and I think we're all going to look at this from a different perspective, just on maybe our familiarity and what our needs are. I personally, I see the argument for delineating by type of work, but I still come back to the buildings, because let's just walk through. If we did a whole meeting on site work, we're really just comparing the relative need among that group. But paving that needs to be replaced is of a different order than a boiler that is about to break. You know, and so being able to see those relative comparisons within a building, to me, is a more helpful way of deciding need. And also, I mean, I hate to, you know, just look ahead to the vote, but there are no site work constituencies. There aren't people that, you know, only vote based on boilers, but there are people who vote based on their school. So just, it seems like a more helpful and relevant way to structure it by school than, and it will have to go through a filter in the end anyway, right? We'll have to take what we learn and put it, you know, across the schools, or we're gonna have to take what we learn with the topic and put it into the school, so.
All right, so understanding that they may not be able to do all three elementary schools by next meeting, would they be able to do the high school or the middle school by the next meeting? That we could have a meaningful discussion. Again, athletics is going to kind of be on the side. It needs to be an ongoing discussion, but we need to look at the other stuff. If it turns out that all the stuff that absolutely has to be done is $20 million, then we got a problem. Because then we have to decide what absolutely needs to be done, needs to be pulled if we need to do something to the athletic fields. So, you know, those are...
If the committee decides by building, what I would propose is that Harvey and I and Walter meet with Barb and Lou. If you say we have up to 5 meetings, we can tell you, here's our plan. we think we can get under the hood of 2 at the next meeting. I would like to have the itemized. I'm with Kate. I would love a little more detail of the athletics, so at least we're starting to think about middle school versus high school as a discussion. But I think Barb and Lou with our team can say, we have up to 5 meetings. We might say we can get it done in 3. Here's what you can expect meeting 1, meeting 2, meeting 3. It could also help with the tours and where we have the locations of the informal and other things. If we're talking about Cornwall Hudson, we may want to go there that Saturday to follow up to the meeting. So there could be some synergy there.
All right, well, I like that. Maybe you guys can get together as soon as you can. Get me the information, I'll disseminate it out so that everybody knows what's coming up next. Now, if we're going on our 2-week schedule, 10/26 would be our next Tuesday. And why don't we just leave it as a 2-week schedule? And instead of every meeting saying this is when the next one's going to be, let's take a look at the next 5 Tuesdays, every other Tuesdays. So we got 10/26, 11/9, 11/23, 12/7, and 12/21. I've taken my buddy over here, and I'm assuming these are really Tuesdays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did
Okay.
random number calculation.
Now, obviously, the size of this group, there may be times that some of us can't make it. I think that's just a given. But why don't we do that? I'll put that out in the minutes. That's when our next 5 meetings are. I will have, when is the play over?
January.
Right when we'll be voting on this, huh? January 15th. The rain date is January 16th, or the snow date, I'm sorry.
January.
That's important. January 15th.
Well, my concern is now I've given up on using the room because of the play. My concern is that eventually this room is used for basketball. And I want to try to keep it in the same building if we can. That's all. Just so that we're not bouncing around the district.
I can't be of any service to you there.
No, all right. I'm just asking. Okay. So our mission is your mission. They'll get back to me, and I'll get back to all of you as to what our topics are for the next, at least for the next meeting, and then we'll see what happens after that. Yes, sir?
I'm sorry to go backwards ever so slightly. I'd like to float one thing. So the athletic concept, field, et cetera, it seems when you look at them both, right? It's pictorially anyway, it's a giant stadium somewhere, right? A giant stadium somewhere, either.
No, to me, a giant stadium is ocean.
Okay, this giant stadium.
This isn't a giant stadium. Multi-purpose field surrounded by a track with some.
For our needs, for what we're coming off of?
Yeah, true.
Can we pull that as a concept and price it as an item? And the only thing you're gonna miss is the demolition component, because it's gonna vary at the school. It won't be full demo at the middle school, where it will be full demo at the middle school, where it won't be full demo at the high school. And that can exist independently and not, I'm floating, I'm asking.
Yeah.
It can exist independently, so now, you can put it anywhere. It's probably such a small percentage of, utility support and infrastructure that has to get to it to support it, that it's really not gonna sway the numbers. The closer you put it to the sewer system, it's gonna be cheaper. The closer you put it in the middle of nowhere, it's gonna be more money. But again, I think if it could exist independently and know that there's the value of it, where do you want to land it? That's a different, the animal of where it goes is a different animal.
One could also then make
Right, and I guess I'd look to my site. I assume there are some inherent differences in the siting and regrading needed, and is there
Absolutely.
bedrock here versus water here?
Yeah.
I'm assuming there are some differences, of course, but I don't know what your thoughts are on the idea of the.
I'm just thinking if it
call it
exists
generic, yeah.
alone, it can be an undertone of our meetings, and that's something we can chip away at and pick away at.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. I think it's fair to the high school and middle school as well. When you look at the price tag at the middle school, it's artificially, yeah. So I think we'll do our work around kind of the à la carte and put some more meat on concession stand, parking needed.
Definitely do that.
It's going to be voted that way anyway, potentially, so it makes sense to.
What's in or what's out, and that's why I asked the question before. It's important for me to know where it's at. Am I doing a pump house? Or am I, force main or not? Is it gravity? What am I doing? And there's a lot to consider there, so, yep. Thanks, guys. So we're definitely on for